Hey there, welcome to episode 70 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. It is 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, March 27, 2025. Today we are going to speak about sharing information, and while this is related directly to what is called now the signal gate, which is a topic getting a lot of attention as I'm speaking right now, it is not specifically about signal gate. It is actually aimed more at what you and me and everybody else could glean from this, what we can take from this very public display of inattention to how the tools that we use work and what we can do to make sure we use them correctly. This is not a comprehensive training video, or audio about how to do secure messaging, but it's some things to think about, to consider, like Wikipedia. This is the beginning, not the end of your search for knowledge, your pursuit of greater understanding of how secure messaging works, of how good practices, paying attention is ultimately a better idea, something we should all be doing more often. The FFS Talk audio program is designed to be a discussion format. So far, only one person participating, yours truly. But ideally, at some point, someone might step in and want to discuss any of the myriad of topics we've brought up thus far, or something new, the goal being to talk about what works, what does not work, and what we can do about it. If you are not aware of what FFS means, you need to meet more Irish people. It is based on a common expression that you might hear anywhere in Ireland, or by extension, wherever Irish people are. They are legion. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes and a few links, 3 shameless self-promotion, and 3 for this episode, links. I will read the summary found in the show notes. We'll run through the links, and we'll get on with the episode. On that note, the summary is thus: a lot of talk in the news this week, as I've recorded this, about government officials using a non-government consumer-aimed messaging tool on their devices to communicate sensitive information allegedly improperly. Should we be concerned about our own messaging and how we use these tools? You already know the answer. The links for today's episode, you may recall the shameless 2 self-promotion links. There are now 3, but 2 are related, of course. I'm gonna mention this a little bit for a couple of weeks, but we'll eventually just they'll be considered a matter of course. The buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo link is my profile in certainly not encourage profile with some biographical information, links to all of my audio programs, links to my favorite coffees, links to my GitHub repositories for different things, some affiliate links, some very passive monetization of these efforts. By the way, you don't have to spend any money at any of these sites. You can if you want. Proceeds do go towards coffee and coffee accessories. It's what powers all of this. The buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page is sort of like a free-form link tree, so I can add links as I see fit. More interesting, perhaps, the Buy Me an Update microcast, which I publish on Mondays exclusively on buymeacoffee.com, is available in the posts section. Thus, I have a link directly to buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts. That's POSTS. I'm sure the S's are picking up nicely. I did add a little pop filter, so we'll see if that cuts down on the S. I say S's badly for microphones, I suppose. And Ko-fi.com, that's KO- or dash if you prefer, fi.com/DanHugo. They do not support directly publishing audio, but I do provide some textual updates there at Ko-fi.com/DanHugo. And again, no obligation to spend money. I have 3 Wikipedia links. The first, Alice and Bob. If you've ever done anything with messaging, encryption, or messaging really, but encryption is part of it, the main 2 actors in the discussion are named Alice and Bob. They are the people having a conversation. They're the people sending each other email. They're the people sending each other messages on Signal or WhatsApp or wherever. So Alice and Bob, it's a good starting point into the whole notion of what happens when I send someone an email or a text or a chat message or anything. And Alice and Bob really technically could also be sending each other mail through the U.S. Postal Service or packages through any number of carriers. So Alice and Bob figure prominently. It's nice to, or it might be nice to be familiar with how these two names are used, but in particular, how they're used in secure communications context. And on the Wikipedia page, there's a table of other names that might be appropriate. I'm not really going to delve into that here, but if you ever hear some other names, Mallory, Alice and Bob, and then Mallory, a malicious third party eavesdropping and causing mischief or worse. Signal app. I've included the Wikipedia link to the Signal app since they mentioned some historical references and how things began and what they're doing, and a link to or a reference to the Signal protocol, which I believe is Whisper, unless that has changed. I think I haven't delved into Whisper in quite a while, but I think they're still using Whisper. These are all open source tools. You can follow through on that if you would like, starting at the Wikipedia page. You can go to the Signal homepage. You can download the application and use it yourself or with friends, or maybe you want to avoid the whole thing. I don't know. Finally, the SCIF. You might hear that term more and more in general. It is a sensitive compartmented information facility. It is essentially a Faraday cage. You're not allowed to bring your phone into it. It's usually a physical room or a space that has been inspected and certified as SCIF worthy. So it can't be susceptible to signal gathering. Ideally, it has no windows, so you can't pick up conversation, like voice conversation with you can have a laser pointed at a window and use the window as a microphone. Cool stuff. So yeah, unable to pick up radio signals, so Faraday cage, and the list goes on. So a SCIF is an important thing that the federal government here in the United States and probably other organizations in other countries or other places with something equivalent use to conduct secure communications or even discussions, which are a form of communication, of course, to try to make sure other people are not part of the conversation that aren't supposed to be. That's where the signal argument, or signal gate, as it is called, breaks down a little bit. So you'll probably be hearing in contemporaneously about how they should have been using a SCIF. The basis for this episode, I suppose you could say. So there's a ton of news and discussion as I speak at this moment regarding the Signal chat debacle, wherein a group of about 15 top-level cabinet and security officials in the Trump administration, including the vice president, were conducting a discussion that really and legally should have been taking place in a SCIF. I'm quite certain that they do, but I don't know exactly how they implement a multi-location SCIF. So to enable SCIF communications between people in different locations, but that should have been the case as well. Signal is not SCIF. It is not certified to be a SCIF node or anything like that. But it was instead taking place using consumer-level application called Signal. This so-called Signal gate scenario becomes even more interesting because one of the participants in the chat is alleged to have added a reporter from the Atlantic magazine, Jeff Goldberg, to the chat, possibly without the knowledge of the other participants. And parenthetically, this is the nature of some chat or messaging applications that support multi-participant chat rooms. So it's not necessarily true or even being alleged that the reporter was added nefariously. It was probably accidentally, but I'm not making that assessment either. But the fact that anyone in the chat room or in the group of participants in a chat could have, and perhaps did, add someone without everyone not being completely and totally aware is some failing, maybe multiple failings. Now there are a variety of accusations, again contemporaneously, concerning message content, how this reporter was added, whether the information gleaned by the reporter should have been reported on, whether it was true, whether this conversation should have been conducted in a secure fashion, yes. Whether Signal is the problem, probably, mostly not, vastly mostly not, 95% not. But there is some room for improvement that they could learn from in this scenario. And the list goes on. But let's let's make this a generic conversation. I will mention Signal Gate in passing a little bit, but this is really something that could improve how we use these tools. Nobody listening to this audio program is working with the Defense Department, I hope, or the CIA, I hope, or any other highly secure organization that may be conducting military operations or perhaps intelligence gathering operations or other such activities that would be marked classified. However, you are probably interested in being able to send and receive messages, sometimes with some level of confidence that they are not being read or captured by unknown third parties. Wouldn't that be nice? In these modern times, it is difficult to know whether your communications with someone else are indeed private, depending on where the other party or parties might be. They might be in other countries where other laws apply about encryption or about who has access to communications, or where U.S. laws might apply differently. And this was made apparent in the what's his name? The disclosures about the NSA, the federal government, basically part of the Patriot Act, capturing and listening in on and so on communications between American citizens and people outside of the country. And why am I totally spacing on his name? It's Snowden. Thank you. I'm like, oh, I picture it. So the Snowden debacle, where he disclosed all these different programs, where if you were involved in a conversation with someone in a country of interest, then your half of the conversation would be susceptible to eavesdropping because they want to know. I mean, technically, I think that was supposed to be excluded, but you're talking to someone in another country of note. So I think that got kind of drawn in. So knowing the rules of engagement, I suppose you could say, between all parties in a conversation, you could say, for example, if I send email to a friend who happens to be spending some time in a Gray Bar hotel, I have no expectation that my letter that I send to that person will be received unopened, right? And same in the other direction. So if I'm communicating with someone and they are in a place or in a circumstance where privacy is not allowed or is proactively attacked within the law or within standards or whatever the case may be, then I really have to be aware of that, so I know that I don't cause more trouble, I suppose you could say, or have trouble caused me. It is important, as always, to emphasize those security practices to everyone. As we are being told from some sources in the Signal Gate debacle, Signal is not appropriate or perhaps should not be used at all, but perhaps because in government communications, especially sensitive and top secret and so on, but perhaps because it was compromised or because it was or might still be a specific security risk. So that's the accusation being made now, that internal communications and warnings and so on from NSA or maybe other responsible and knowledgeable agencies suggested or advised or required that Signal not be used for communications. And then the counter argument is, but it comes installed on our phones or on our laptops. So then the question is, was there correct and appropriate training that said you can use Signal if you need to communicate with your loved ones or something? You want to send a message that says, hey, I'll be home tomorrow. That seems innocuous, but that informs anyone listening in on your plain old text messages that, okay, you're traveling tomorrow, then we will conduct some sort of an operation in that context. So it may be that mildly secure, like civilian level encrypted communications for appropriate conversations with appropriate people. But if you're conducting military or intelligence operations and so on, there are better tools for the job. So that's the advice that has been allegedly given. And the same may be true for you. So there's another facet that the reporter included, that was Jeff Goldberg, in the chat was allegedly included as a result of some intrigue, or perhaps accidentally, or perhaps as part of some sort of spying operation, or there are a lot of fingers pointing in a lot of directions. It is important to understand your communication methods and tools, though, and these fall under OPSEC for that crowd, operational security. I believe that's what that stands for. But you as an individual in the world can have your own take on that, your own responsibilities and requirements, depending on who you're talking to and about what. So let's talk about Alice and Bob. These two characters come up a lot in any discussion or presentation about communication between two ends, and in this case, two people. There could be more characters involved, and if you look at the Wikipedia article, they name a third and a fourth participant and so on. And there are some subtle things that happen as you add participants, and we'll talk about one or two of those here, but only briefly. How to best add participants to a secure communication after it has started is something to think about. And knowing who is in on a conversation at all times is something to think about. So there could be more characters involved, but starting with these two encapsulates one end and the other of the information sharing process. One of the most important participants in this two-person conversation, and again, the signal gate scenario is like 15 or 19 or something. So we're not focused on signal gate so much, but you and another person, a coworker, a colleague, a family member, a friend, whoever, you believe you're having a two-person conversation, whether or not you add someone later or whatever the case may be. But there might be another player, there might be another participant or actor involved, the so-called man in the middle. This is where someone is able to access this conversation without Alice and Bob aware of this leak or compromise. And it is a very real possibility. In fact, it is the reason to have secure communications. Somebody is always listening. It's what they are able to hear and discern, I suppose, is where it gets interesting. So and you can imagine if you are in a mall or in public somewhere, and you're having a private conversation with a friend, but you're out in public, so you can assume that someone can hear you somewhere. You may be sitting at a focal point in an elliptical room, so someone at the other focal point can hear you quite clearly. So-called whispering rooms. Right? So you should always assume someone's listening. So let's look at some Alice and Bob communications issues to ponder. Again, you should check out the Wikipedia article as a starting point if you're actually interested in any sort of secure communications. There have been many books and articles and pieces of software and research papers and so on. The topic is vast. And note the table of names again and of the other actors used in illustrating and describing the various challenges of private and secure communications. Just the size of the table, and if you look at the descriptions, gives you some indication that there are a lot of subtleties. That's why there are so many names. So yeah, there's a third and a fourth name in a multi-way conversation, but is another person malicious? Are they passively eavesdropping? Can they disrupt your communications? And the list goes on, literally. So in the context of Signalgate, what am I? So in the context of in the context of Signalgate, the challenge of these communications between multiple parties and so on with an unintended participant. So, and note that there will be more facts and accusations flowing for some time. So the list of things I'm going through today in the context of Signalgate, but not necessarily about Signalgate, that we can all sort of ponder in our own secure communications practices and day to day. So I think I got through that paragraph okay. Whenever I go off script, so to speak, and then I have to get back on, I have to figure out where I was. So it's not an investigation of Signalgate, though. Just remember that we're not diving into Signalgate. We're going to see what we can learn from what's being talked about at this time. And again, there will be more stuff coming out, but stuff that we can apply to how we use the tools at our disposal and the methods that we should be using to do that. So just a reflection. So I have a few bullets here. We should choose good tools. The U.S. military and security infrastructure have their own tools. In fact, they make their own tools. They have the resources to do the research and so on. The NSA is alleged to have done some crazy encryption and decryption stuff. So who really knows? And if they're listening right now, great. They have their SCIF standards at the federal government level for these secure organizations that are security aware and require such security. Signal is almost certainly not included there, but Signal for non-military, non-national security discussions is probably okay. Probably. It is open source. You can find more information about that in the Wikipedia article. It can be inspected. You can look at the source code. You can look at the protocol, the Whisper protocol, the algorithms, all the stuff. So you can see how it's functioning, and you can decide for yourself, or you can have someone you trust do that. Security audit. And if you're sharing information at a personal or business level, Signal is one way to do that. I will say for myself, I would treat Matrix as maybe a little bit more open, and not to say that Signal is not open source and whatnot, but Matrix is being developed with a sort of a longer view on secure communications and so on. So I like Matrix and everything that they're doing, matrix.org. We'll talk about that some other time though. And then Signal, and then Telegram, and then kind of everything else. So Telegram is really easy to use, but they really don't make end-to-end encryption as obvious or as easy to use as they could, whereas Signal, you can pretty much assume you are having an end-to-end encrypted conversation. So, and Signal has been much more proactive about, as the kids say nowadays, popping off whenever there's legislation proposed or privacy limitations, encryption backdoor requirements, and so on. So they're in on what you could call the good fight. So it's something to be aware of. So I treat Signal as sort of the go-to security conscious platform, and then I'm looking at Matrix as more of a forward, not so broadly adopted, not so easily used, although it is easy to use. So anyway, there are other platforms, as I've sort of intimated here. Ultimately, this decision is one to be made with consideration. So you should definitely think about it. Know what you're choosing and why. Alice and Bob need to keep their devices secure, physical, and we call it physical security, where if your phone or your laptop or other device is compromised, that is, somebody had access to it, maybe they were able to figure out what your PIN codes or see your passwords, or they looked over your shoulder, that's a compromise. Or maybe they just stole it outright. Maybe you were crossing into a country, you crossed the border, they plugged in a USB cable and they pulled off all of the information that you had stored on your phone. That should never be enabled. You can get around that in certain ways, but I'm sure the border people love to be able to access all of your stuff. Communication must stop if this happens, and an assessment must be made concerning any information that was included on the compromised device. So if somebody was able to get all of your passwords because you stored them in a text file on your phone, that would be something to know about and be very concerned about. Alice should know Bob and should be able to confirm that Bob is in the conversation is the Bob in real life. There are simple protocols for this, usually involving a voice or video interaction, like a phone call or maybe not a Zoom call, but you can do some quick video. Essentially, the protocol is something like, hello, Alice. Hello, Bob. Is this you in the text message? Yes. Okay. Well, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna hold up a picture, or I'm gonna take a screenshot, or I'm gonna do whatever, and you need to tell me what is on the screenshot, and sending it to Bob in the text message is tricky. You could hold up your phones to a camera. You can essentially it's I'm gonna share information with you that then I can verify that you are the same person that received it by you telling me in person or in this video or voice call. So I've kind of made that sound more confusing than it is, but it's essentially a second way of verifying. If I have you sign a document, for example, if you're at a bank, they may have your signature on file, so they can go and say, oh yes, okay, the person that's standing in front of me is the same person that signed this signature card, 5 years ago. The signatures seem to be similar. You can do facial, like take a picture and whatnot. Now, if anyone can take a picture and put it on their profile and pretend to be Bob, that doesn't work. So you really have to have some interactive verification. But it's important to do this, and people don't often do it. And that's where you get people faking, or you get, hi, I found production by street. I found your phone number in my contacts. Yeah, great. I don't know who you are. So yeah, Alice should know Bob. Bob should know Alice. Along with physical security, oh, by the way, in a multi-person conversation, it's really valuable if everyone knows everyone, but that might not always be the case. So then you get into, who do I trust enough to allow them to decide that the person that they've included or invited to participate is the person that they say they are. So there's a whole trust model that we are not going to get into today. So along with physical security, maintaining strong and secret passwords or other access credentials is critical, partially because they can be so easily compromised without knowledge. That is, if your phone is missing, you know, oh, my phone is lost. Somebody may have stolen it. If your password is compromised, and this is another facet of Signalgate that is coming out in Der Spiegel magazine and elsewhere, that, oh, somebody found some old passwords that were used by these very same people that do still seem to work on some legacy accounts and, you know, WhatsApp or a Gmail account or something. So these compromised passwords have not been changed or allegedly. So passwords are tricky because if they live on forever, that's why there are password rotation policies. Change your password every week, etc. Or you should, well, there are a few things. So you may not notice your password has been compromised, but it may have been. And it's so partially that, but partially also because the password or passkey, or no, what is it? Passkey? Is that yeah, I think it's passkey. Password, passkey, or two-factor, or, you know, the different ways of people authenticating individual identity at this point. Is a piece of the secure communication process that an individual has some control over. They should be aware of that, and how they manage this piece of information as part of the process is perhaps an indicator of their overall security awareness. So if they use the same password in multiple places, writing it down on a Post-it note, for example, the kind of cliche at this point, using easily found information to create a password is bad. So, for example, I believe one of the people used their spouse's birthday and initials or something like this, and used it in multiple places. So this is information that's easily found, and this is the first place where people will look for, there's a whole, they call it a dictionary attack. They'll take a whole collection of commonly used terms and they'll add in things like your birthday, and they'll switch the digits around, or they'll add your kids' names and birthdays and all that stuff, pets' names. These are all very common. And when people use those, they're indicating a lack of awareness. So that's something for you to be aware of. If either Alice or Bob are able to add additional participants to a conversation, both Alice and Bob, and then later any others, should always be aware of who is participating, even passively. Like if they can access the conversation and they're not actually saying anything. And that's part of the problem here, I think, is that so long as Mr. Goldberg was not speaking, there was not an active awareness of exactly who was in the conversation, because, I know that the two people that are talking are involved, but did everyone in the conversation know who everyone was? Probably not. Better end-to-end encrypted multi-user chat tools, and found more commonly now, in fact, in general, direct messaging on LinkedIn, for example, does this, will implement their encrypted conversation scheme so that anyone who joins at a given point in time will not have access to the existing conversation as it was up until that point, which protects the existing participants from having shared information that the newly added person should not have access to. So if you and I if Alice and Bob are talking, they're sharing like, okay, well, here's the password, and here's the time and place where we will access the information, and so on and so on. And then they add a third party. That third party is unable to see the previous discussion, so does not have access to the passwords, and so on. This is a good practice. And in addition to knowing that there are new participants, the new participant should never have access to the previous conversation. It can be inconvenient, but it is the best practice. The path between Alice and Bob is important, sometimes critical. If your communications are stored somewhere with email, this is called store and forward, it must always be encrypted or not decrypted in transit. So it must stay encrypted, or it must be encrypted, no matter where and how many stops along the way. Ideally, communications are peer-to-peer rather than passing through servers, which offer additional opportunities to eavesdrop if they do make stops along the way. Although in our next point, we'll see that almost nothing is peer-to-peer, really, in the modern day. So if it can be captured through any sort of interception or eavesdropping, other parties might be able to decrypt your communications. This is called a well-funded adversary sometimes. So if somebody really wants to know what you're talking about, they might have the resources to grind through your messaging and decrypt and determine what you're talking about. Note also your messaging application or perhaps your email server are moving information around and are perhaps storing it somewhere. Wait, did I just say this? Yeah, no, okay. And it's hopefully encrypted. Don't forget that your communication channel is also routing your traffic, so the internet, so that information from your mobile device is passing through a cell tower or an internet service provider perhaps, or same with your laptop, your desktop. So any of these devices, they may be sending data. It may be going, I'm talking directly to these 15 people. Well, first of all, you're passing through cell towers or Wi-Fi access points or whatever, and then the actual data may be stored on the Signal servers, which I think they do, et cetera, right? So where are your bits going and who has access to them? It's not always obvious. Bluetooth is an example of peer-to-peer, even though it has its own problems. But peer-to-peer networking is not really so common because of the way communication infrastructure is built. So even though you're using, back in the day, Skype was peer-to-peer, but not truly peer-to-peer because you're passing your internet traffic through your internet service providers. If you're sitting in a coffee shop, it's traveling through the coffee shop Wi-Fi access point. If you're using your cell data, it's passing through cell towers and passing through your carrier like T-Mobile or AT&T or Verizon or whatever. By the way, these are only a few of the reasons a competence and security aware organization, especially a government and its military and intelligence organizations, would understand all aspects of all of this and more and not rely on any tools or methods that are exploitable outside of their control. So you may not have that luxury, but you can still make informed choices and maintain that awareness. So this is where they would advise people to not use Signal, because Signal is not completely aligned with SCIF requirements. So it's good for some things. Anything where you don't need to be in a SCIF, and the government has a whole collection of these rules that nobody follows apparently. So if you're just going to talk about where are we going for lunch, conduct that communication over something like Signal. But if you're talking about top secret classified information and so on, do that in a SCIF context. So that'll be something that people will not focus on enough, perhaps, but that is the crux of the Signal Gate problem. There's another problem about record keeping, but that will be much more of a problem in general, I think. So let's talk about the man in the middle real quick. There are a few names in the Wikipedia table to describe this role, sometimes passive, other times malicious. So let us simply address the general case where there is someone else involved with access to the messaging moving between Alice and Bob, with access to those messages in the clear, as we say, or not encrypted. By the way, it is a good assumption that there is always someone accessing your encrypted communications. There's always someone listening. Some paranoia goes with this whole process, so you should always be kind of concerned. I mentioned earlier, you should always assume that someone is going to open your mail if you're sending it to your friend or family loved one or so on in an incarceration facility, for example. So for the casual user, that's us, this part of our production by Street. For the casual user, this part of our communications is often unaccounted for, probably due to a lack of understanding or awareness. So we're not always assuming that there's somebody listening, but you should, which is part of an overall problem, perhaps, knowing how domain name services function, for example, and who might be interested in what you are using that for. This is a common, it doesn't really come up so often all the time, but it's a commonly raised issue that if your ISP, your internet service provider, is also your DNS provider, so you use, say you have a cable company or a DSL provider, AT&T or whomever, if they are also serving your domain name services requests, then they know all of the domains that you're looking at, whether you're sending email or visiting websites or whatever you're doing. They can collect usage information and sell that data. They could even attach it to you. They could provide demographic data as well. So having that awareness might make you say, maybe I should use a different DNS. They can also determine where your internet traffic is flowing, so they know which websites you're visiting, how much data you pull from them, and so on. And even though there's encrypted internet more common now, there are you still have to route that traffic to IP addresses, so they can still tell where you're going. Sometimes the metadata is almost as useful as the data, so that if they know who you're sending emails to or who you're sending text messages to or which websites you're visiting. They may not necessarily need to know what you're doing there, but knowing your traffic access patterns is still useful. Maybe good enough for now that you are contacting Bob. Maybe later they'll want to know what you're talking about, but knowing that Bob is on your list of frequent interlocutors is useful. If we look objectively at the signal gate scenario, the reporter is an invited guest in that chat, allegedly, but is not necessarily an intended participant, so that they are essentially in a man-in-the-middle scenario. Jeff Goldberg had access to unencrypted messages between all parties, and he could also have participated, but did not. And because the other participants were perhaps not paying attention or were not proactively examining all participants, so they weren't always aware of who was listening, they shared information with intended recipients, not knowing that there were unintended recipients. We could argue, probably successfully, that Signal in this case could do a better job alerting people to exactly who they were speaking to at all times, who is in the conversation. Though this is something of a screen real estate issue for mobile devices, and it could be, if you have a vast group of people in a discussion, it's maybe humanly difficult to keep track of, there were 100 people, now there's 101. I don't know which one was added. How they show you that people are added is something that may need some adjustment or tuning. And again, you shouldn't be using these tools for this type of conversation as well. So it's something of a conversation should be had in many corners to see, is it corners or quarters? To see how to better do this and not run into this problem in general. But again, the government should not be using consumer tools. We're almost done. A couple of examples. We've all probably have examples of situations where we send a message to the wrong person, or add a recipient to an email, or forward the email without being aware that the conversation in the email was disparaging to the new party. So we've all been there. We've all done these sorts of things, and I'll have my 3 examples here. In the case of email, this is where Alice and Bob need to both be aware of the importance. Wait, what did I write here? Need both to be aware of the important. No, to the other communication. Oh, they both need to be aware of the importance of the fact that their communications remain secure, and they both need to be aware to each other. They both need to know that the other knows that. Whoever writes this stuff needs to be fired. Bob could always forward the clear text. So if Alice and Bob are having an encrypted conversation, business or whatever, gossiping, whatever it is, they're having this email back and forth. It's encrypted emails. But once Bob reads the email, it's no longer encrypted. So he may say, I'm going to forward this conversation to a friend of mine. So he forwards, but that person's not conducting an encrypted conversation with him. So he forwards the whole conversation as clear text. So he has now undone all of the encrypted communication between Alice and Bob by sending the entire clear text. We call it ciphertext if it's encrypted, and clear text if it's not. So sending the clear text somebody else completely undoes all of the encryption prior, right? You've now opened the can of worms, so to speak. So if Alice doesn't know that, or even if Alice does know that, it makes the whole thing moot, right? Like, why did you send that to the person? Especially if you said, like, we were talking about Zeke, so it starts with a Z, and now you forwarded it to Zeke, so Zeke knows that we were talking about him. So that's usually bad. In my own experiences, the very human element, and that's usually where the problem is, because humans are involved in this stuff, has led to, at one time I commented in the client included Slack channel. So, and that's always going to be a problem if you have a Slack channel internal and a Slack channel that includes external. Oops, I was in the wrong one. That happens. Whoops. Sending a witty or perhaps inappropriate text message, and some people send the wrong picture, and we won't get into that, to the wrong recipient due to maybe you selected the wrong name, or maybe you thought you were replying to a text. Like if you just reply to the text message that's most recently received, then you didn't know that you received a new text. There's all kinds of ways that can happen. And those are user interface problems, or becoming overly familiar, or developing bad habits and so on. So you sent it to the wrong person, and then whoops. And I've done that more than once. And then when you forward an email that included disparaging remarks about the new recipient, who hasn't done that? So these things happen, and it's a very human thing, and it's just because we get lazy. And the fact that those things happen might be good because hopefully they're learning experiences, although, at some point they just are a fact of life. So what can we do about all this? Humans are a huge part of the problem, mostly because we are creatures of habit. We don't always pay attention to the subtle changes. Like I would suggest the unaudited auto-corrected text feature that is found in most mobile devices, for example, has caused more problems than it has solved. Like you hit send and you're like, what did that, it changed that word to something else entirely. Because we typed it and we thought it was correct, and our tools have gone and undermined our best intentions. And we very often do not understand what is happening behind the curtain. So you don't necessarily know how the stuff works. You just know that it seems right. While it is impractical to require every person using modern tools to understand all aspects of how they function, it is important for those using tools for important things to understand how they might do damage to those important things by not knowing how to use those tools. So, for example, when Bob forwards that message to Zeke, he should understand that there is no longer any privacy between Alice and Bob. That conversation is now open. Zeke can forward it to anybody he wants. So end-to-end encrypted, if there are screenshots or if somebody can copy and paste, you have to trust the end and the end, right? But we sent encrypted email. Yeah, but I decrypted it. If you don't trust the man in the middle, you should be able to trust the recipient. If that person's going to do that kind of stuff, they're just another man in the middle. It is very, very easy to make simplifying assumptions, made worse on occasion by inattention to user experience, cues, interfaces, documentation, hints as to what is really happening. This places some of the onus, yes, some blame, on makers of these various tools we are all using more and more often without knowing what they're doing. No, Signal is not responsible for Signal Gate, but Signal could learn what a group conversation might have going on, might have some special cases and whatnot, and might consider adding a particular setting where only the owner or administrator of the conversation can add additional participants. And I have to be honest, they might already have this. They should either way, and this should be general. You should always have some control over who can add participants if you intend to have any sort of encrypted conversation. That should be par for the course. So they may well have that. So I haven't checked. I literally have one Signal group chat between myself and two other people. And I don't, other than saying, okay, we're all in this chat room, I don't believe we've explored these various features. So I just haven't used it. I don't really do a lot of chat room discussions. I'll be honest, I've been involved with more Discord and Slack and Google, whatever Messenger. No, not Messenger. Google, what do they call that? Hangouts? No, I don't know. They could all be better. This sounds a little bit odd, but secure communications, they should really be the norm. Everybody should be using secure communications. We should all be completely comfortable with TLS, for example, the successor to SSL, that is used in our secure internet connections. That's the S in HTTPS. We should expect end-to-end encrypted or E2EE messaging and support for it in our various tools and applications and so on. We should expect our data to be stored securely if it is out of our control. This has been a point of failure so many times. It is difficult to imagine anyone believing their social security number, and more recently now their entire genetic makeup, is secret in any way. And most importantly, we should expect others to be aware of these as we are. Sort of like driving a car. We can all see what happens when one driver goes very wrong. So we all expect and hope, and the law requires, that everybody knows the rules and will be responsible moving these death machines around, hopefully not using them for that purpose. We should expect the same when anyone with the Defense Department or in our friend group is talking about the same in chat. So we should use these tools responsibly, and we should expect the same from others. And we're seeing in a very public way that's a big ask, but we should be asking it more often of more people, so that the general population, and if this conversation were in fact someone driving a vehicle, say a bus or a vehicle that's carrying all the participants in their government signal gate chat, and that person decided to, veer off the road and roll down a hill and whatever. Like, somebody would say, well, you just don't do that. Like, if I was driving that vehicle, you don't, and if you're in the vehicle, you would hope that's, so there'd be a lot more of like, personal experience and relation to what's going on. So if more and more people are using these tools for end-to-end encrypted group discussions, and what happened, oh yeah, somebody added the wrong person and we were talking about them and all. Yeah, so the more experience people have with this, the more we're able to identify with and bring the proper amount of concern to bear on these circumstances. So we should always expect more and more familiarity with these various tools and methods and technologies and so on. Otherwise, things happen and we have no idea the implications or what could have been done better and so on. So we're coming up on, this will probably end up being about 45. It's 48, coming up on 49 minutes. Probably be about 45, 47. That seems like enough time to talk about this. But I think this is an important issue in general. We're not all talking about military strikes on other countries or other such things, but we should all be aware of who is listening in on us and what we can do to try to avoid that. So this will come up again in different ways. It already has. I've already talked about not understanding our technology and so on. So we should do better. And we can by learning more, being more attentive and more aware, and setting our expectations of our fellow humans so that they know what they're doing and how it impacts us and vice versa. That's where we're going to leave it. I think my voice is tired. Thanks for listening as always. Until next time.